أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين رحمة للعالمين بالقاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. صلوا على محمد. We've been talking about engagement with the divine, a kind of an active, dynamic response. One of the challenges that we as Muslims face in contemporary times is that of modernity. How can a religion which was institutionalized, which came about in the 7th century, be existing and respond to the various challenges that we face today? A religion which many think is divinely revealed and all the laws are divine, how can that be applicable in today's world? Is there a need for change? And if so, how can this come about? These are just some of the issues that I wish to tackle today. One of the issues that people have a problem with is the word reform. And as I've hinted at a couple of nights ago, I believe, that reform does not necessarily mean that we are reforming the religion or that we are reforming Allah. What we are trying to reform is our understanding and our response to the divine in contemporary times. Unlike Christianity, there is no church nor a priesthood in Islam. Because when Martin Luther in the 16th century, he started his Reformation movement, he was protesting, hence the name Protestant, he was protesting against the excesses of the church, of the corruption of the church, the demand for extra money from the church. And he was also challenging the authority of the Pope. We don't have a churchhood in Islam. We certainly do not have a Pope or priesthood. We have scholars who are basically ulama, who are interpreters of the word of God. So reform in Islam is not based on reforming an institution as much as it is based on rereading and reinterpreting the text. In other words, because one of the most authoritative things in Islam are the texts, we are not challenging as much as rereading, re-understanding, revisiting, and to see how the texts are applicable today. We need to understand, first of all, in order to get into our discussion, the difference between Sharia and fiqh. Many of us tend to use the two terms as if the two are the same. They are not. There is a difference between Sharia and fiqh. Many a time what we are referring to as Sharia is actually the fiqh. What is the difference? Sharia are the principles, the values that are embodied in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet. In other words, the values that the Quran wants to instill within us. And the laws also. Whereas fiqh refers to the human understanding, human interpretation of that Sharia. So whereas all Muslims have the same Sharia, whether you are Sunni or Shia or Sufi, we all believe in the same God, the same values, the same Prophet, etc. But all Muslims do not have the same fiqh. The Sunnis today have 4 schools of fiqh, as we know. At one time they had 10. And even within the Ja'fari madhab, the Ja'fari fiqh, although we have one school of law, the Ja'fari school, but we have different interpretations, as we are aware. I would like to very briefly talk about the word Sharia, because as we are aware, one of the claims by those who are Islamophobes is that the Muslims are here and they want to impose the Sharia on us. In fact, what they mean is the fiqh, but they do not understand. Even the Muslims do not understand the distinction between the Sharia and the fiqh. But whatever the distinction, one thing that we have to bear in mind, and something that we need to point out to non-Muslims, that even in Islamic countries, within Islamic countries, Muslims are not allowed to impose their laws on non-Muslims. In other words, even if you are living in a country which professes Islamic law, abides by Islamic Sharia or Islamic fiqh, Muslims cannot impose their laws on Christians or Jews or minorities. Christians and Jews, the Ahlul Kitab, are allowed to practice according to their own laws and their own schools, their own judges, etc. They can even drink wine as long as it's not done in public. They can eat pork as long as it's not done in public, and so on, within their own quarters. If Muslims are not allowed to impose their laws in their own countries, how can they do it here? We're not allowed to do that. I do not wish to go into the details, but to give you an example, there are two types of Jews in today's world: the Sephardic and Ashkenazim Jews. Sephardic are the Mediterranean Jews, Jews who lived, for example, initially in Spain, and then when they were kicked out by the Christians from Spain, came to live in places like Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and so on, and even in Jerusalem. Ashkenazim Jews are the European Jews, those who lived in areas like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Russia, Germany, France, and so on. When you compare these two kinds of Jews, Sephardic, the Mediterranean, and the European Jews, there is a big difference. Those Jews who lived under Muslim rule were allowed to retain and practice their own laws, their own culture, their own music, their own lifestyle, because Islam said so. Whereas Ashkenazim Jews, those Jews who lived in Europe, we are all aware what happened to them: the Holocaust, pogroms, mass exile, and so on. The point I'm trying to make here is that even in Muslim countries, Muslims are not allowed to impose or to require non-Muslims to abide by their laws. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alihi. Therefore, we talk of the fiqh of Imam al-Sadiq, not the Sharia of Imam al-Sadiq. Because, as I said, the two are not the same. We must also remember that fiqh, essentially when we are referring to Islamic law, we're not referring to Sharia. We're talking of Sharia fiqh. Fiqh is not totally sacred. A lot of it is dependent on human interpretation and human understanding. That's why we have differences. If it was all coming from Allah, then there would be no difference amongst the ayatullahs. The fact that there are differences shows the human agency working through them. So, another point that we should also remember is that fiqh or Islamic law did not start with a clean slate. Islam was not reactionary in its outlook. It did not say that because these laws were there before the coming of Islam, we have to do away with all of them. Islam was very, very careful. Those laws, in fact, we can talk of three types of laws: the ta'sisi, islahi, and imza'i laws. Ta'sisi are those laws which Islam introduced, especially when it came to the ibadat, the interaction with the human and the divine, prayers, fasting, hajj, and so on. Although there was hajj even before, but there were different kinds of hajj before the coming of Islam. Islahi are those which Islam changed and tweaked a little bit here and there. Things that Islam felt needed to be changed according to the needs of the times. Whereas the imza'i are the majority of the laws that we have today are imza'i. Imza'i means endorsed. That Islam endorsed those laws which came before it. It did not introduce them. Some of it may have tweaked a little bit, but the majority of the laws, marriage laws for example, our marriage laws are not something that Islam introduced. There may have been slight changes. For example, before Islam, the mahar was given to the bride's father. Islam said, no, the mahar has to be given to the bride, not to the bride's father. Similarly, mut'a marriages, for example, were those which were imported from pre-Islamic time. And so many other laws, laws on businesses, on purchases, debts, limited partnership, and so on. In other words, those laws which were based on local customs, urf as it's called. Urf, the same word that we've all heard many, many times, ma'ruf. The word ma'ruf is derived from the word urf, that which is commonly known. Urf or local custom was Islamicized, if you like. Islam made it as part of its own sacred law. That's why you will find that when it comes to the halal and haram, especially when it comes to the mu'amalah, human transaction. Most of the Quranic verses there are prohibitive rather than creative. In other words, it's prohibiting what it felt was wrong. But there were few laws which were creative, that is, Quran created new, simply because those laws were already there. The only time when the Quran created new laws, when it felt what was there was wrong. So, for example, laws of inheritance. Women could not inherit before the coming of Islam, whereas the Quran gave women the rights to inherit. Sallu ala Muhammad. So there was a large element, if you like, of local urf or local custom, which played a role in the formation of the law in the early period of Islam. You can see the influence of local custom by the fact that the law sometimes differed depending on where you went. So, for example, if you had a man who went AWOL, you know what's AWOL, right? Absent without leave from the wife. And he just disappears. Well, that's dangerous, but anyway, he just disappears. We don't know what happened to him. Is he dead? Is he muttering around? Or simply he just deserts his wife? That's my job. In any case, then, the question is, how long should the wife wait for before she can remarry? Does anybody want to take a guess?
6 months. 6 months.
2 years? 3 years? That depended on where you went and whose school you followed. I'm talking of the Ahl Sunnah school. According to the Maliki school, no, according to the Hanafi school, she does not have to wait very long. She only has to wait 120 years. If the wife, women joke, but this is in the books. If the wife does not, if the husband does not turn up after 120 years, she is free to remarry. I don't know about you, but I've not even seen a woman of 120 years, let alone one whose dentures are falling around again and I'm looking for a hubby kind of thing. You don't have that. The Malikis, the Shafis were a bit more reasonable, says, no, you don't have to wait 120 years, you only wait 90 years. So that goes to show how unreasonable many of these laws, and frankly ridiculous they were. The reason why they kept 120 years, because in those days, that was the average lifespan of a man. They did not have KFC and McDonald's in those days. So you can see that. But according to our school, by the way, she will refer it to a mujtahid who will do some kind of research, and within a few years, maybe 3-4 years, if they could not prove that the husband is alive, then the mujtahid or hakim al-shara would himself recite the talaq. And the example I gave there, of you have a woman, a young lady who is about 19, 20, who is what we call Rashida. In other words, she can take care of her affairs. She's capable. If she wants to get married on her own, does she require the permission of the guardian? And the guardian is normally a father. It's a very patriarchal society that we are dealing with, by the way. Or I should say it was. According to the Hanafi school, which was in Kufa, she does not need it. It's good to get the permission of your guardian, but you do not need to. According to the Maliki school, again, see how the laws differ depending on where you are. Malik was living in Medina. Medina was distinctly Arab, conservative. And therefore, he said that even if a girl or if a woman is 40 years old, she can handle everything, but, and excuse the language, but this is what he says, as long as she's a virgin, she needs the permission of her guardian. So the permission did not depend on her capabilities, it depend on whether she was a virgin or not. So that goes to show how in many ways the law differed and sometimes was frankly misogynistic against the women. As far as the Shia schools is concerned, there was no need for ijtihad during the times of the Imams, because the Imams were there. Ijtihad means human independent thinking. In fact, the Imams said very clearly that we give you the usul, you do the furu, meaning that we give you the general principles of law. You derive the laws based on these general principles. The Imam cannot envisage each and every aspect of the law. He cannot tell you, in this circumstance do this, in this circumstance do that. He'll give you the general principles, and then you derive the law according to those circumstances. But ijtihad, as we know it, and I mentioned it, I think a couple of nights ago, really starts in the 13th century with Muhaqqiq al-Hilli. There was a need to rethink the law, to derive new, fresh laws. Ijtihad enables us not only to think, but more importantly to rethink. Ijtihad enables us not only to formulate a law, but also to reformulate that law. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. In many instances, I find that reform is only possible, or changes are only possible, if Muslims are able to speak their minds and discuss things openly. In many societies, in Muslim societies, Muslims are not able to do that. In fact, I have experienced, and many scholars have been in the same situation, where Muslims are more able to freely express and think here in the West than in their own Muslim countries. So in the Muslim countries, the moment they say something which is not conventional, they are labeled as kafir or American Muslim or this and that. In other words, Muslims are more free to express themselves. Freedom of expression also means freedom after expression. Many a time somebody can express himself, but then, as they say. So we believe that the religion is universal. If the religion is universal, it means the law must expand in order to cater for newer circumstances, not contract. There is a verse in the Quran, this is a verse in the Quran, Wallahu yuridu lakumul yusr, wa la yuridu lakumul usr. Allah wishes ease for us, not difficulties, contrary to what we may think. In other words, sometimes a law which was instituted, which was created in the past, if that particular law is proving cumbersome, difficult for the people, then that law can and sometimes must go through change, as we shall see in a bit later on. More importantly, we need laws that are able to connect with our contemporary times. I remember the first time that I went to Qom, which I mentioned, was 1983, and we were reading a 15th century text, and Lum'a. And the first question that was posed in front of me is that if a mouse falls into a well, how many buckets of water do you need to remove from that well to make that water pure and park? And I said, mouse. When was the last time I saw a mouse in London, where I was living at that time? Let alone a well. And then, how do you, and so on. Things which were largely abstract, which may have been relevant at a particular point in history, but in today's time, they are not really relevant. Islamic rulings then may change based on the needs of the society. I mentioned yesterday of zaman and makan, which are two principles which are often used by ulama, by scholars, in legislating new laws. In fact, when I went to home in the year, about 10 or 15 years ago, I remember, there was a 14-volume work, 14 volumes, which is called Ijtihad al-Zaman al-Makan. Ijtihad and Zaman al-Makan, the need for change based on society, based on time, and based on place. Sallu ala Muhammad. The question that is often posed is that, well, we believe that Islam is the perfect religion. Halal Muhammad, halal hatta yawm al-qiyamah. Haram Muhammad, haram hatta yawm al-qiyamah. That the halal of the Prophet is halal until the day of Qiyamah. How can you then institute changes? How can you make changes? What we are talking of is not the laws, but what is called the mawdu. Mawdu means the circumstance. In other words, the law, every law is for a particular circumstance, particular condition. But when those conditions change, do you still apply the same laws? If we did that, then we could still be talking about slavery and sort of thing. But rulings do change. To give you an example, this is within our fiqh. In the past, the ladies might like to hear about this, but during the times of the imams, the mahar was given at the time of the marriage. I hope you ladies have received your mahar. If you're not, then you can talk to your husband. But seriously though, the mahar was given at the time of the marriage, half of it at the time of the aqd, the nikah, and the other half at the time of the consummation. If a woman then claimed that she had not received her mahar, she would have to prove that she has not received it. Because the custom was that she received it at that time. Now when you come to Shahid al-Awwal lived in the 13th, 14th century. At that time the custom had changed. Now they had the mahar mu'ajjal and mu'ajjal, that is postponed or delayed, or that which was given basically the man and the woman had a right to choose or negotiate when the mahar would be payable. And many a time it was payable when she demands it or after X number of years. Now if she claims that she had not received the mahar, the law changes now. Now it is the husband who has to prove that he actually has paid it, because the custom had changed, the mahar was payable, now the law changes, whereby it is the husband who has to prove that he has actually paid. And to give you one or two other examples, we will not go into the details. Water, for example. The principle is, again, we can give you the principle, the law changes according to the needs of the time and place. The principle is something which is easily available, you cannot sell it. You cannot sell it. So water is easily available in winter, haram to sell it. But Sheikh Tusi says, in summer, because water is scarce, especially in the desert, then you can sell it. Blood, for example, for the longest period, had no value at all. There was no need for it at all. Therefore, it was haram to sell. Now that we know blood does have a lot of value, then you are allowed to sell it. The principles do not change. What is halal and what is haram do not change in principle, or what is right, or what is honesty, what integrity, etc. They do not change, but the laws change. And importantly also we need to know there are no changes in ibadah. In other words, we cannot say that we'll now pray only 2 rakat for Maghrib or 2 rakat for Isha. Those do not change. It is the mu'amilat, that is social transactions, which change. At the same time, we need to differentiate between the fixed and variable aspects of law. Alcohol is always prohibited. That can never change. Only time one is allowed to consume alcohol is in dharura or in emergency. But labor laws, for example, can and sometimes must change. Many a time I feel that we use past rulings based on what others have given the rulings in the past, rather than the God-given akal which we have been talking about. In other words, akal has a great and important function, and many a time I feel that we have neglected that. If you look at the study of Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr and even Mutahari, they both say that akal has played very limited roles in the derivation, in the new laws. Our laws should be measured by divine values. In other words, what Allah would like to do with us, the spirit of the Quran, as I said before, not just the past rulings. This has been a pattern which has been continuing, especially in Qom in Iran, for a considerable number of years now. I mentioned before that there is a silent revolution in Qom. One of the laws, for example, which was particularly bothersome and which came to light after the Salman Rushdie issue, you recall, right? What happened with Salman Rushdie, etc. The issue of murtad, apostate, somebody who claims that he or she no longer wants to be a Muslim. Now, according to the fiqh, it said that an apostate should be killed. Interestingly, the Quran does talk of apostasy. In other words, somebody turning away from Islam. Nowhere does the Quran say that an apostate should be killed. Because apostasy, turning away from Islam, is between the human and the divine. If I say, na'udhu billah, I would not say, but for the sake of argument, if I say that I do not believe in God, who are you to come and kill me because of that? That's between me and God. If I have done wrong, then Allah will punish me. Sallu ala Muhammad. There need some chairs. So apostates, then apostasy is something very personal. But that law that an apostate must be killed was actually instituted after the Prophet's time in a particular circumstance, whereby those who were turning away from Islam were actually creating sedition, fitna, anarchy in the Muslim community. In other words, they were not only leaving Islam, they were encouraging others to leave Islam. They were creating doubts in them. There's a different scenario. Hence this idea that apostates should be killed came at that time. But you'll take an example, for example, in the West here today. If a Muslim decides not to believe in Allah, well, it's up to him or her. Therefore, Ayatollah Muntaziri, who you'll recall was a very prominent Ayatollah, at one time appointed to be the successor of Ayatollah Khomeini, came out with a clear fatwa. It was very bold of him, by the way, saying that no, apostasy an apostate should not be killed because there is freedom of conscience, freedom of worship. You are free to enter a religion and you are free to leave a religion as long as you do not create fitna in the community. One of the other laws, and I just want to give you an example of how these new laws are coming about and the effect that they are having on the community. One of the laws was reported by Ayatollah Mujnordi, not Murujardi, Mujnordi, who was actually a student of Ayatollah Khomeini. He has got 8-volume works on the questions of new laws. He wrote to Ayatollah Khomeini regarding stoning, as you know, for zina, even though it's not in the Quran, it's in the Hadith. The hudud, or the had, the punishment for zina is stoning. And Mujnordi wrote to Ayatollah Khomeini that, look, today people are turning away from Islam because of this act. Is there a way whereby we can find a different form of punishment? Because especially the young youths in Iran we're talking of, and even in the West portrays Islam as barbaric because of such acts of hudud, of punishment. And the response that came from Ayatollah Khomeini was this, that the image of Islam is more important than the form of punishment. After all, why do we punish? In order to act as a deterrence, in order for people not to commit that crime. Then you tell the juries to look at different forms of punishment, imprisonment for example, rather than engage in those kinds of punishment which turn people away from Islam. We have new literature, by the way. Most of this is in current laws or response of Muslim questions in the West. They are translated and available in English. This new genre of literature cater to issues for us in the West. So for example, the issue of praying in the North Pole, or where there is no sunrise or sunset during the time of the years, in the summer or in the winter. You've heard of Iqaluit and Nunavut, right there in the Canadian Arctic. There is actually a mosque there, and you can Google it too. It's called the Mosque of the Midnight Sun. They actually so cold that they could not build the mosque there in Nunavut. They actually built it in Winnipeg, and that they poured it 4,000 kilometers, I believe, just to the Arctic. So how do you pray there? And according to Ayatollah Fazlallah and Sistani, they said that you follow the times of the nearest places that have night and day, and therefore you can pray and fast accordingly. In other words, whatever closest place to Nunavut, which has night and day. Ayatollah Al-Khouei had a different answer. He said, if possible, you should migrate from there, and if not possible, then you apportion your prayers based on a day and night, and so on. The revelation, my sisters and brothers, is from Allah. There's no doubt about that. The revelation from Allah, but the laws are socially and culturally specific. As I said before, we need to distinguish between principles and laws. Principles, the Sharia. Laws, the fiqh. The principles in the Quran are permanent. They're universal. Whereas laws are addressing a culturally specific community. And those laws are responding to that particular time. And those laws can change. This is the whole meaning of ijtihad. Sallu ala Muhammad. It is because the laws are culturally specific that we have laws on slavery, female witnesses, jihad against non-believers, and so on. What I find, and this is just purely my understanding, we have made culturally specific laws that were instituted at one particular point in time. We have made them eternal and universal. That's why I said Muslims need to review and revise the law, as long as they are not divine, they are humanly interpreted, in order to the dictates of their changing circumstances. Otherwise, we'll have to accept the fact that 2 women is equal to 1 man, and child marriages and so on. Remember this much, gender differences does not mean gender discrimination. Just because women are different doesn't mean that we should discriminate against them. I see quite a few people are taking pictures of that also. So, there are tools which are available for rethinking the law. Simply, as I say, because Islam is a practical religion. One of these is the principle of maslahah. And again, the discussion here is deep. I don't want to go into great details. But maslahah basically means that which is in the interest of the community. That which is in the communal interest. If a law was at one time in the interest of the community, but is no longer serving the interest of the community, can that law be changed? Now, some of our ulama have said no, because we do not know in reality what is the will of God through our own reasoning. But interestingly, in Iran, for the longest period, the ulama were refusing this. But situation was such, there was tension between the law that the parliament wanted to pass, and there is a special assembly of experts, Majlis-e Khobregan, as it's called. And those who were the experts in the law, they said, no, this is against the law. There was tension continuously until the situation was brought up to Ayatollah Khomeini, rahmatullah alayhi. And he himself insisted that there should be a committee established which would override the assembly of experts if and when it was necessary. Can you see how the tension was there? That laws, which was sometimes a hindrance to the maslah, the needs and the welfare of the community, and the Ayatollah himself established an institution within the Islamic, within the Iranian democratic system in order to implement maslah itself. There is another principle called la dharar wa la dhirar. In other words, there is no harm nor harassment in Islam. Again, it connects with the principle of maslahah, that where there is something which is impeding the Muslim community, then that law can change. So for example, the question of organ donation. Is organ donation allowed? These are issues which were not there before, because the means to transfer an organ was not there in the past. And again, the ulama have given the decision that as long as, based on this principle, there is no harm and no harassment. As long as there is no harm to the donor, then it is permissible. Essentially what we are talking of then is a need to explore the realm beyond the law. In other words, there is a special field that most of us do not even talk about, where the law is, where Islam does not say anything about it, to put it differently, where scholars can legislate, because there is no which is prohibiting or anything like that. It's called mintaqul firagh, the lacunae, a void whereby laws can be derived based on reasoning, because there is no law on that particular realm. And I'll give you examples. It is in this realm, in this domain, that aql can play an important role in deducing new rulings, in conjunction with the principle of urf and the principle of siratul uqala. I talked about siratul uqala yesterday. Siratul uqala, to refresh your memory, means the behavior of reasonable people. How would reasonable people judge a particular situation? And you can create new laws based on that. Now, I'm not saying that we all go around doing that. This is left to the experts. But because law does not cover every domain, every particular aspect of Sharia, there are large sections where the law is silent. The question that had arisen in the medieval era, whether the Quran was created or not. There's nothing in the Quran to show whether it was created or not. There is no law on trade unions, for example, on patent and copyright laws. There is a law on stealing, yeah, but are there laws on copyrights or patent? No. On the ecology, on cloning, these things do not exist. So it is in this realm then that such issues can be dealt with. According to Ayatollah Jafar Subhani, who is a prominent Ayatollah in Qom, he says, in the derivation of new religious laws, it is the local custom and the thinking of the community of reasonable-minded people that can formulate the law. To give you other examples, IVF, in vitro fertilization. There is nothing in the Sharia which talks of IVF. Or DNA, transgender surgery, which is allowed, by the way. So these kinds of laws, which were not there in the past, now the jurists have been asked to give their understanding on it. So for example, Ayatollah Subhani says, the question of sculptures or painting. In the past, statues were prohibited because people used to worship them. As we know, idols or idolatry is not allowed. But if I went back to Tanzania and I bought a particular 2 Maasai statues, now if I were to keep them in my living room, would I actually be doing Mungu wangu, Mungu wangu? No, we would not be actually worshipping the Maasai. They are there for aesthetic purposes only. So because of that, Ayatollah Jafar Subhani has ruled that such things are allowed. Why? Because the fact that we do not worship them anymore. And as I mentioned, we do need a mujtahid to do this. This should not be an arbitrary process. There are other issues also, especially in the West, for a long time, by the way. I don't know whether you remember this. Before 9/11, for a long time, there were fatwas after fatwas going on. This is kafir land, haram to vote. You register to vote, you will register to go to hell. You remember those? Suddenly after 9/11, because the need arose for us to be part and parcel of the West, that which was haram became wajib. We were told now you have to vote because it served the Muslim community. So, working in the judiciary in the West, laws on shares and bonds, for example, mutual funds. These are all newer issues, especially, although not completely facing those living in the West. An eternal God speaks eternally. The old fiqh paradigm, as I call it, has a very strong patriarchal ethos, meaning it was based on a patriarchal tribal system. But our present readings, our present understanding is a very female, women-friendly ethos. We have to rethink many of those laws. My friends, revelation is open, but many times I feel that our minds are closed. We cannot limit Allah to 7th century Arabia. There is nothing sacred about Islamic laws on guardianship of women, or that a slave girl should not cover her hair in public. There's nothing sacred about it. Or that a woman cannot inherit a husband's land, only the house. So if she inherits the house without the land, where do you put the house? And Ayatollah Mujnordi, by the way, challenges such views. He says these are not God's laws at all. On the contrary, he says that we need to rethink many of these laws. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. Due to local customs, the prevalence of local customs, in my view, the prophets and the imams endorse certain practices as long as they did not violate the ethical, moral framework of the Quran. However, we cannot continue to use laws which were based on the local custom of 7th century and make them eternal and infinite. We, on the contrary, the whole purpose of ijtihad is to rethink, review, revisit, and sometimes come up with newer laws. We as human beings should not become a community of imitators. Rather, we need to be a community of thinkers. Remember this much, my sisters and brothers. Whenever a community stops thinking, it starts sinking. That's an important message. Sallu ala Muhammad. Sallallahu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Sallallahu alayka ya ibn Rasulillah. روحي وجسمي وأرواح العالمين لك الفداء يا غريب يا مظلوم يا شهيد من أرض كربلاء. Tonight is the night of the eve of the 8th of Muharram. Our minds, our hearts yearn to remember about Abdullah and the musibah that he faced, the continuous trials that him, his companions, and his family had to endure. A person by the name of Hanzala bin As'ad, somebody was deeply attached to Imam Hussein. He goes to the army of Ibn Sa'd before the fighting starts. And many of these companions of Imam Hussein knew the Quran very well. Some of them had memorized it. So here is Hanzala who comes to the army of Ibn Sa'd, and you know what he does? He appeals to the Quran. He says, "Oh people, I fear for you that you will become like the people of Noah, that you will become like the people of Ad and Thamud, who were punished in front of Allah for committing grave sins. I fear for you, O people, on the day when there will be no protection from the wrath of Allah. Why are you killing Hussein? What has he done wrong to you? If you kill Hussein, you will be punished. You will be doing a grave sin." But Hanzala's words did not reach very far. Hanzala came to Imam Hussein, and the Imam allowed him. He gave his life. Another group of people, Umar bin Khalid, there were 4 of them. All 4 of them went together and fight. They were surrounded by the enemy at one point. You know who Hussein sends to go and help them? Abbas. Abbas, go and rescue Umar and his companions. All of them were rescued. Later on, they were all killed. Tonight is the night of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. Abbas was only 34 years at the time of Karbala. The riwayat tells us that before Imam Ali passed away, he turned to his brother Aqil. Aqil was an expert in genealogy. And Imam Ali told Aqil, "I want to marry a woman whose tribe is known for bravery, for loyalty, for standing by the truth." And Aqil found a lady by the name of Fatima bin Hazan. And he said to Imam Ali, "There is no tribe which is braver than hers, because the traits that you are looking for, the characteristics you're looking for, the genealogy are in that tribe." It is because of this that Ali ibn Abi Talib married Hazrat Fatima, Umm al-Baneen.